welcome to another video to teach you about the wonderful world of Latin. Today you're going to learn about the passive verbs in the present system for the first and second conjugation. So let's review or learn what all of those terms mean. First of all, you learned that there are 6 tenses of verbs: the present, imperfect, future perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect tenses. These can be divided up into 2 systems. The present system includes the present, imperfect, and future verbs, and the perfect system includes the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect verbs. Since we're learning about the present system forms today, you're going to learn about the forms of the first and second conjugation in the present, imperfect, and future tenses. So what's that passive voice thing that I've mentioned? Well, when we talk about parsing verbs, you give me the person, number, tense, voice, and mood. So far, all of the verbs that you have learned and been using are in the active voice. Today we're just going to add in the passive voice so that there's another option here. These are the only 2 options in Latin, the active voice and the passive voice. We're going to do this for the first conjugation and the second conjugation. So remember, first conjugation verbs have a second principal part that ends in are, and second conjugation verbs have a second principal part ending in long ere. In a later chapter, you're going to learn about third and fourth conjugation, passive voice forms, and you'll be happy to know that some irregular verbs like sum esse do not have a passive voice, while other irregular verbs do. So, what's the passive voice? Well, the active voice is the one you already know. It's where the verb communicates that the subject does the action. And the passive voice is the voice you're learning today, and it means that the action happens to the subject. Now, we can use derivatives to help us understand these things. So the active voice, that active word comes from the Latin verb ago, agere, egi, actum, a verb you already know that means to do or to drive. So the subject is doing or driving the action of the verb. And passive comes from a verb you do not know yet that means to suffer or to endure. So the action is endured or suffered by the subject. It happens to that subject. Let's look at some examples. So in this picture, you see that the man drives the chariot and the horses pull the chariot. Since the man is the subject and he's driving the chariot and the horses pull the chariot, the horses are doing that verb. Both of those are sentences in the active voice. We can turn these sentences into the passive voice by saying the chariot is driven by the man. Notice that with the passive voice, the subject changes a little bit. So the direct object, the chariot that the man was driving, changes into the subject now. So the chariot is driven by the man. Same thing with the horses pull the chariot. Now our subject with a passive verb is the chariot is pulled by the horses. If we look at another example, we can see that in the active voice, you have the man attacks the lion and the lion attacks the man. In both of these, the man and the lion are actively attacking. They're the ones doing that action. If we switch these to the passive voice, you can see that the lion is attacked by the man. So the lion is enduring that attack. It's happening to him. And the man is attacked by the lion. Again, the man is enduring this attack. In all of these sentences, you'll notice that they're all good English. It's just that English tends to like the active voice. However, the passive voice gets used a lot more in Latin, so you have to be a little bit more aware of it. And each of them has a slightly different emphasis. Is the man doing the attacking, or is he enduring the attacking? Is the lion attacking, or is the lion being attacked by the man? It emphasizes the action slightly differently. The passive voice can also be used to show a little bit less information. In this picture, you could say in the active voice, someone placed fruit in a bowl. You don't really know who placed the fruit in the bowl, but to use an active verb, you have to throw in someone. However, with the passive verb, you don't always say who's doing the action or what did the action. You can just say the fruit was placed in the bowl. This means that the passive voice tends to be used a little bit more in science things where we don't know who or what is doing it, or is used to sort of hide guilt. The fruit was placed in the bowl. We don't know who did it, but we know that someone did it or something did it. So the fruit was placed in the bowl. In an active sentence, you have to include a subject that shows a little bit more uncertainty. So someone placed the fruit in a bowl. Let's see how well you are understanding the difference between active or passive. So these 6 sentences are from a helpful book called English Grammar for Students of Latin. And it asks you to identify whether the English verb phrase is active or passive. So see what you can figure out. All right, here are the answers. The number 1 and 3 are active. The were falling and did carry are active, and the other ones are passive. As you look at these, you'll notice that ing is a sign or hint that the verb is active. In the others, with the passive voice, you'll notice that there's the ed form of the verb and a helping verb. So were raked, has been given, will be announced. Some form that has a form of to be and the form ed of the verb. This is a nice hint to show that it is a passive verb, but as we'll see, it's not always clear. So really the best way to figure out is the verb or verb phrase, active or passive, is to look at whether or not the action is happening to the subject or if the subject is doing the action. So to make that point a little bit clearer, let's look at the verb to love. In the active, we can say I love, you love, he, she, or it loves. In the passive, you could say for those same persons and numbers, I am loved, you are loved, he, she, or it is loved. So the passive has that ed form and the helping verb to be. If we look at the plural forms, you can notice that both active and passive have the helping verb are in English. So are loving for active and are loved for passive. The ing and ed can be helpful, but they are not always perfect because remember, we loved is the translation for a perfect verb, whereas we are loved is the present passive form. So we have to make sure we're being careful and noticing is the subject doing it or not. So now that we know the passive voice in English, let's look at the Latin forms of the active and passive voices. So you already know the active forms for the present system. For those, you take your stem, add a stem vowel depending on the conjugation. First conjugation uses A, second conjugation uses E. For the tenses, you add a tense marker. For present, there is none. For imperfect, it's ba. For future, it's bo, be, boo. And then you add on endings. For active, ost, mus, tis, ent, with that m sometimes being used for first person singular, so like bomb. Those are the active ones you know. The passive ones still use the same stem. They still use that same A and E stem vowel. They still use the same tense marker. However, they change the ending for the present system passive verbs. They use are, ris, tour, moor, mini, and tour for their endings. Now, I realize that this slide is a little bit confusing and a good overview, but I want to point out that really all we're changing right now are the endings to make the verb active or passive. Let's look at these in a little bit more detail to refresh your memory and teach you the new passive forms. So let's look at the present active indicative forms of amo, amare, amawi, amatus. You already know that these are amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatus, amant. Remember, you're getting your stem from amo or amare, taking off the o or the ra to get a m. Then, because it is a first conjugation verb, adding in the a, and then putting on your endings ost, mus, tis, ent. Hopefully, the first principal part is the first person present active indicative. So that's why it's just amo without any extra a in there. If we want to make this passive, all we do is change the endings. So we don't use ost, mus, tis, ent. We use ar, ris, tour, moor, mini, and tour. So amor, I am loved. Amaris, you are loved. Amat tour, he, she, or it is loved. Amamur, we are loved. Amamini, y'all are loved. And amantur, they are loved. So to practice with these, I want you to use the verb monio, monere, monui, monitum in the present. Remember that this is a second conjugation verb because it has that long ere, so instead of the a, you're going to use a long e. So pause the video, put down your forms, and then check them. Okay, hopefully you got moneor, moneris, monetur, monemur, monemini, monentur, because all we're doing is changing that ost, mus, tis, ent to aris, tour, moor, mini, and tour. Notice you still keep the o in the first person singular, so moneor. Okay, let's move to the imperfect active. Again, you're still using that am stem coming from your first two principal parts. You're still using that a, and for imperfect active, your endings are bombas, bot, bamus, batus, bont. I was loving, you were loving, he, she, or it was loving. If we change these to the passive, we keep the stem and our tense marker ba, we just change the ending. So instead of bombas, bot, it's bar, baris, batur. So first person singular, amabar, I was being loved. Amabaris, you were being loved. Amabatur, he, she, or it was being loved. Amabamur, we used to be loved. Amabamini, y'all used to be loved. And amabantur, they used to be loved, or they were being loved. So again, it's time for you to practice with the imperfect passive forms of moneo. So practice and pause the video, check when you're done. All right, your forms are monebar, monebaris, monebatur, monebamur, mone bomini, and mone bontour. Again, remembering just using aris, tour, more, mini, and tour. Okay, now let's learn the future forms. So the future active, you remember, has bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitus, bunt. And remember that this is only for first and second conjugation. Third and fourth conjugation do something slightly differently for the future. For the active, remember, it's just your stem, your vowel A or E, depending on your conjugation, and then bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitus, bunt. Remember, only the first person singular has bo, and the third person plural has boo. When we go to the passive forms, things are similar to what you've already seen. We're changing our endings to aris, tour, more, mini, and tour. However, for one of these, we need to change the vowel in our bo, be, boo. So in the second person singular, the short I does not play well with the RIS, and so it changes to a short E. So I'm a Barris, you will be loved. All the other ones have bo, be, and boo where you expect them. So I'm a bore has I will be loved with that O, just like in the active. Second person singular, like we said, changes to Barris. So I'm a Barris, you will be loved. I'm a bit tour, still has the B that you expect. So she will be loved, or he will be loved, or it will be loved. I'm a be more, still the BI for we will be loved. I'm a bimini, y'all will be loved, still has the BI. Third person plural, still has the boo. I'm a buntor, they will be loved. For the second conjugation, I will let you practice those. So pause the video, practice, and then check your work when you're ready. Hopefully you got mone bor, mone Barris, mone bittour, mone bemore, mone bimini, and mone buntour. Make sure you kept that O in the first person singular, kept the U in third person plural, and changed the BI to BE in the second person singular. For I will be warned, you will be warned, he, she, or it will be warned, we will be warned, y'all will be warned, and they will be warned. So these are all of your indicative forms. As you remember, there are 4 different moods of verbs in the Latin language: the indicative, imperative, infinitive, and subjunctive. The subjunctive you will learn later. The indicative, you have just learned those forms for the present, imperfect, and future tenses. And the imperatives, Wheelock doesn't care that you know the passive form, so we're not going to worry about those. The infinitives, however, those you need to learn the passive forms of the present infinitive. Remember, infinitives do not have a person or number. They're without those endings, so they don't have person and numbers. So the active infinitive is ARE or ERE, that second principal part. To love, to warn, amare, monere, that's what you got. For the passive, we just change one letter in the first and second conjugations. That E changes to an I. So it will be amari, to be loved, and monere, to be warned. So those are all of your new forms. They will take a little bit getting used to. So to help you get used to them, here is a way to check your understanding. Please answer these questions and then call me over to check your work, and then I'll tell you what to do next. Thank you.